This is American history for October 14th. This is the beginning of Lesson 9. Well, in 1800, it is a mandate election. The Democrat-Republicans are going to nominate Thomas Jefferson. They are also going to nominate Henry Burr as Jefferson's vice president. Now, of course, the president is John Adams, and he is nominated by the Federalist Party, and Adams chooses Charles Pinckney as his vice president. Now remember, the guy who gets the most votes is going to be president. The guy who gets the second most votes is going to be vice president. So we will assume that either Adams or Jefferson will win, with Adams or Jefferson as vice president. But that's not the way it worked out. In the 1800 election, again, we can see in electoral college votes that Jefferson is going to win 73 votes to 65 for Adams. This gives Jefferson the majority. But there's a problem. When the electoral college members went to vote, each member was given two pieces of paper. One for who he wanted for vice president, and one who he wanted for president. The problem is they put them in the same box. Now, since they were counted out of the same box, how do we know which vote is for president and which vote is for vice president? So in 1800, we have a tie. We have a tie between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. Now, the Federalists see this as an opportunity to deny Jefferson the presidency. And so the Federalists are going to back Aaron Burr. Alexander Hamilton is going to use his authority to try to get the delegates from New York to vote for Burr as well. Well, it turns out that Burr and Adams tie. Now remember, in those days, the state was only given one vote. So let's look at Virginia. Virginia had 21 votes in the Electoral College. That means Virginia had 19 members in the House of Representatives. But Virginia only got one vote. Tennessee has 3 Electoral College votes. Well, that would mean that Tennessee only has one member in the House of Representatives, but they get just as many votes as Virginia. And so it worked out that neither Jefferson or Burr won on the first ballot. It took ballot after ballot after ballot, but finally on the 35th ballot, Hamilton is going to throw his support behind Jefferson, and Jefferson will be our president. Now, Hamilton expressed that he did not like Jefferson's politics, but he did not like Burr, the man. Well, here is a recap of this election. We'll skip over it though. The Congress is going to change this by passing the 12th Amendment. Now, the 12th Amendment states that the electors shall write down who they want for president and who they want for vice president. So, for example, here in the state of Missouri, our electors will meet in January of 2020. And whichever way the state goes, the electors will write down the name of the guy running for president, and then next to him write president, and the guy for vice president, and they'll write the word vice president. That way, we'll never have this problem again. As Democrat-Republican candidate, Jefferson had spoken a great deal about the abuses of the federal government. And everybody just assumed that when Jefferson became president, he would diminish the power of the federal government and increase the state. However, Jefferson actually increased the power of the federal government at the expense of the state government. Just the exact opposite. Jefferson will become a loose constructionist. And that's simply someone who believes that if the Constitution does not prohibit, then you may take on that responsibility. Well, Adams knows in December of 1800 that he is out, as well as the members of the Senate and the House. The Democrat-Republicans have won the White House. The Democrat-Republicans have won the Senate. The Democrat-Republicans have won the House. The Federalists will pass the Judicial Act of 1801. Now, the delegates will meet in December, but the ballots won't be counted until March at the earliest. And with this big brouhaha, it won't be until the middle of April that Jefferson is president. In 1801, the Judicial Act is going to increase the number of judges on the district level and on the magistrate level. Now, to become a federal judge, it is a three-step process. Step number one, you have to be picked by the president. Step number two, you have to be confirmed by the Senate. Step number three, you have to get the piece of paper that says you are a judge. Well, let's look at poor William Marbury. William Marbury was asked to be a magistrate in Baltimore, Maryland. He was picked by the president. He was confirmed by the Senate. But in that time period for him to receive the paper, he did not receive it in time, and the new president, President Jefferson, said he would not give it to Marbury and several others. Well, Marbury is going to challenge Jefferson's actions in the Supreme Court. Marbury is going to call for a writ of mandamus. Now, what that means, writ of mandamus means bring the paper forward. Writ means bring forward. Mandamus is the order or the paper. That's what Marbury wanted. Well, the case made it all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, in his opinion, Chief Justice John Marshall is going to rule that the Jefferson administration should finish the paperwork, that Marbury should get his magistrate judgeship. But, and here's the important but, Marshall and the court are going to rule that what Marbury had challenged the law on, the Judicial Act of 1801, was unconstitutional. That Marshall said you have to go all the way back to the Judicial Act of 1789 that originally set up the courts. That the act of allowing the judge to call for a writ of mandamus to benefit himself was illegal. This is what we call in court circles judicial review. Now, there is nothing in the Constitution that allows for judicial review. But there's nothing in the Constitution that says you can't have judicial review. This is what we would call loose construction. Well, the Federalists didn't seem to mind because it's going to strengthen the power of the Supreme Court. The Democrat-Republicans didn't mind because all of these judges that had been appointed by the Federalists now are out of a job. Marshall argued that only the judicial branch could interpret the law. Now, this court case became known as Marbury versus Madison. Madison was the Secretary of State to Jefferson, and it was Madison's job to deliver the paper. Now, Lincoln University requires all of its incoming American history students to learn about 15 to 18 different Supreme Court cases. This is the first one that is on their hit parade. This is probably one of the most important court cases the Supreme Court has ever handed down. Now, here are three judicial scholars who are going to talk about Marbury versus Madison, but unfortunately we will not be able to watch it because if we show it, YouTube might say we can't see the whole video. In 1802, the Napoleonic Wars were being fought in Europe. Now, in the Napoleonic Wars, Emperor Napoleon is going to invade Spain, and Spain is going to be taken over by Napoleon's brother. Spain is going to cede the city of New Orleans, the land west of the Mississippi River, and the Mississippi River back to France. Well, remember in the last lesson we had talked about Pinckney's Treaty, and Pinckney's Treaty had said that the Mississippi River in New Orleans was a neutral river. Well, now it is not. To rectify the situation, President Jefferson is going to send this man, Robert Livingston, to France to buy New Orleans and the Mississippi River for $10 million. Now, Jefferson had gone to Congress, and Congress had appropriated the $10 million. So when Livingston set foot in France, he had a check for $10 million. But France countered. France said that selling the Louisiana land would be worthless without the river and New Orleans. So France offered all of Louisiana to the Americans for $15 million. Now, this is the Louisiana Territory right here. It will double the size of the United States. Well, it's going to work out to about 2 or 3 cents an acre for the land. It's going to encompass the Arkansas River, the Missouri River, the Red River. This was just too much for Livingston to pass up on. And Livingston is going to agree to the French. He gives the French $10 million as a down payment and says that he will give them the additional 5 after Congress approves it. But Napoleon's going to throw in a wrinkle on his own. Napoleon is going to tell Livingston that if the United States doesn't cough up the additional $5 million by a certain time, then France is going to keep the $10 million, keep New Orleans, keep the Mississippi, keep the Louisiana, and we would be out a whole lot of money and a whole lot of land. Well, Congress had not authorized this greater amount. This went beyond the scope of what the Constitution allowed. Now, of course, Jefferson was a strict constructionist. And if the Constitution does not allow, then you cannot do it. But this was just too sweet of a deal. And so over the objections of many Democrat, Republican congressmen, Jefferson and the Senate and the House will go along, and the Louisiana Purchase, the Mississippi River, and New Orleans are now ours. Well, when the treaty was brought before the Senate, many Democrat Republicans in the Senate were opposed to this treaty. They said that as a strict constructionist, Jefferson did not have the right to do this. The Democrat Republicans were opposed because there's nothing in the Constitution that allows the president to buy anything without congressional approval. Now, Jefferson countered, well, I had congressional approval for the river and the city, and the land deal was just too sweet to pass up. The Federalists were opposed to the Louisiana Purchase because they felt that future states that would come out of this land would be Democrat Republicans. The treaty was a great deal for the United States, and the Senate eventually approved. Well, now we've got the land. What exactly do we have? And so Jefferson must send out a group of explorers to explore what we have just purchased. And that's where we'll start on Friday with Lewis and Clark.